Hi, everyone. Привет. I'm very excited to be here. We will talk about mature products, I promise, but I wanted to start a little bit with my own story. Click. I love pivots, which is why I'm going to talk about them today, both in professional life as well as personal life. I've switched careers more than I can count. I've moved a lot. And one of my most relevant pivots that's really important to mention here today is that I pivoted from Ukraine to the US. I was actually born in Ukraine, in Kiev, and I moved when I was very young to New York. So I grew up in the States as well, but it's very special to be able to be here, and it's my first time in Lviv in Western Ukraine. Thank you. So also on a personal note, I've transitioned a lot career-wise as well. This awesome spin wheel here is just a microcosm of all the different industries and jobs that I've had. Everything from biomedical engineering to brain cancer research to disaster response for an oil spill in Mississippi to transitioning into technology, working in the finance sector. So you'll hear mostly about my technology experience today, but these pivots are important, and between my professional and my personal experiences, they led me to somewhat develop a personal mantra, which I call BFAB. There's a fly on here, which I call BFAB. So it's important for me, and I think for everyone to consider, to belong to something bigger than yourself. It really gives you meaning and powers you through the tough times, both product-wise or personal, whatever you may be going through. Also to evolve, that's really the theme of pivots, evolution of where you can go to next. Having a personal connection to the work that you do and the people that you work with will make a huge difference. Having fun. I'll talk a lot about transitions and pivots, which means you constantly have to think about where you're going to next, what all the different opportunities are, but you have to remember to be present and to enjoy the present moment. So you can't forget to have fun, and I have some fun moments throughout the rest of my speech planted. Aligning to your values is also really important for me. The work that you do will be that much better, and the impact will be felt that much more when you can align. We heard about personal values during one of the product talks earlier today. And bonding with your team, I strongly believe, can really multiply the impact that you can have at work. If you invest in team building, in really making personal connections with the people that you work with, your work result will be that much stronger. So, with the personal section finished, let's transition to actually talking about work. How does all of this carry over into pivoting for mature products? Before I go to the next slide, I'm curious, how many of you are familiar with the product lifecycle? Just a show of hands. Awesome. So this slide you've seen before. I think we have a panel next that will talk about this as well. I won't spend too much time going through each section, but we're here to talk about pivoting for mature products, so we're going to focus on the latter half, the mature phase and the decline phase. So this means that we're talking about products that have reached their peak. You know, they have great sales, they've acquired users, and they're even at that cusp of a tip, which means threatening that decline. So what can we do for products that are at the top of their game? How can they reinvent themselves? How can they prevent decline? And how can they instead go on to a product extension curve? Or better yet, how can they enter a virtuous loop of reinvention, the cycle that you see on your left-hand side? So there's some possible approaches that I want to talk about today. I have essentially some case studies that I want to walk you through based on the 4 approaches that I will talk about. But I'm also curious if you all have any ideas for approaches you've tried to extend the product lifecycle, or ones you may have studied or have been familiar with. Just shout it out, raise a hand. I want to see if you can guess the 4 that I'll have in the next slide. What are some ideas you have to extend the product lifecycle? None? Oh, okay. All right. I'll just go to the next slide. So these are the 4 that I want to talk about. They're not an exhaustive list. There are so many different approaches. This is just some ideas to get you started to think about some possible ways to explore. So I want to talk about user retention and engagement, especially in consumer products. This focus is really important. You can't pivot and you can't think of other product ideas to take your users onto if you don't have them still engaged, especially for a mature product. You want to make sure that your users are still with you. They still love you. They're still using the product. Another great approach is also expanding the product suite, the type of core services that you offer. Partnerships can also be a good strategy that we'll talk about. And finally, last but not least, adjacent products. And what I mean by adjacent products is you have your core product that has reached the maturity stage, this peak. And you have some things that you've learned how to do well. You have success. How can you take that and move it to a really similar product, adjacent, or perhaps the same product but in a different industry, slightly changed? So we'll talk about that as well. So this was a lot of theory, and I want to take these theoretical concepts and talk about actual case studies, examples from my personal work experience. But before we do that, I also want us to keep in mind, as I talk about through the examples, the considerations we should keep in mind while we're pivoting. Retaining users, growing engagement, and growing revenue and profit are 3 goals that you want to keep in mind. As a mature product, perhaps at a mature company, these are the 3 goals you'd want to reach when you're pivoting, and you'd want to make sure you're not sacrificing any one for the other. I think of them as a 3-legged stool. So you can't achieve a successful pivot and really where you want to go to ensure sustainability for your product or for your business without having all 3. One will suffer without the other, and I'll explain how and why. So with that said, the 2 examples I'll talk about are from my recent work experiences at Spotify and working on Minecraft while I was at Microsoft. We'll start with Minecraft first. So before I get into the meat of the examples of pivoting, thinking about my BFAB mantra, I want to talk about why I had fun, why me and my team loved working at Minecraft. One of my favorite examples to talk about is how we spent a whole day debating what colors the blankets on the llamas should be for the game. This is a true story. So these are the colors that won out. I hope you're supportive. Okay, so moving on. I believe probably a lot of you are familiar with Minecraft, but in case you're not, it's the #1 best-selling video game of all time. And that's actually on PC and on mobile as well. It's actually the #1 paid mobile app, both on iOS and Android, I believe, still to date. There's over 170 million copies that have been sold. There's over 100 million monthly active concurrent users. It was actually a game that was created by an indie game studio in Stockholm, in Sweden, called Mojang. And Microsoft acquired Mojang, the video game studio, back in 2014. So by the time that I came on board, Minecraft was already at the top of its peak. It was already the #1 game. So my challenge was, how can we prevent this decline phase? What can we do next? How can we keep it growing? As you can imagine, especially with the acquisition from Microsoft, Microsoft was expecting a big payoff. They really wanted ROI. They wanted to see that Minecraft still had a long lifeline ahead of it. And before I move on, I really want you guys to participate this time. If Minecraft is the #1 best-selling video game of all time, what do you think is the #2 best-selling video game of all time? That's a good guess. Think really basic. Tetris, yes. #2. I was really surprised that Minecraft surpassed Tetris. So, to start in Minecraft, to think about building a product or continuing to lay a foundation for this long lifeline. We wanted to create a video game franchise that would exist 50, 100 years from now. We thought it was important to start with the users. Minecraft had a really big fan base, a huge and really strong community. So we thought it was important to start with our players first so we can bring them along to whatever we would want to pivot to next. That meant that we wanted to focus on some of their pain points. So looking at the community, one of the things we wanted to address is some of the issues they were having. One of the biggest complaints players had was that it was difficult for them to play together, and they always wanted new additions to the game, new features, new characters. We would call them mobs. And it was difficult for us because Minecraft was available on many different versions, on console, on phone, on PC, on different kinds of computers, and they were all different code bases. So they were disparate and disconnected, so players couldn't play together online. And also, it was difficult for us to add new features because we were constantly playing catch-up. When we would create one type of character or we would add a feature, we would have to do it multiple times in each version of the game. So that said, our idea was to combine code bases as the first pivot. We took our players on a journey, had some awesome results, and we were really able to accomplish this. So because the players were able to now be united and play together, it freed up a lot of our dev work so that we could focus on new features. It even gave us time to focus on launching on new platforms because we just used this one code base everywhere we went now after doing the grunt work. We launched on Oculus Rift, so VR, Apple TV, and Fire TV. Those were our 3 new platforms. So by focusing on this united code base, we were able to retain users and grow engagement. Users wanted to stay in the game and not churn out so quickly because now they could finally play in a different way. They could play together easily with whatever friends on whatever devices. Before they couldn't. And we were able to add new features and, of course, new platforms, so that grew engagement as well. They wanted to interact with the new things in the game. What we realized is that we missed growing revenue and profit, and that 3-legged stool is really important, and Microsoft wanted the ROI on their investment. So we wanted to pivot to focus on revenue as well. And to do that, we tried to think about how we can extend the product suite. What kind of products can we add to the core product, which is the game, that allows us to have more monetization opportunities? That led us to think about what we wanted to do and what problems we can solve for our players. It needs to be mutually beneficial, especially when a really strong, passionate community is involved. So what we ended up doing was looking at some of the pains that our expert players had. There are these really passionate players in the Minecraft community that were spending days, hours on end, making their own creations within the game. Minecraft is a world where you can basically build things and do whatever you want. There's no levels and bosses to beat. It's just a sandbox. So they were making these amazing creations, and they were sharing them with other players and allowing players to experience the game in a different way. The trouble was that players had a tough time accessing these creations they were making. There wasn't any easy and safe way to do so. They had to go to random websites where there was malware, they were getting viruses. And it was also difficult for the creators to make these creations available. They had to host their own websites, they had to figure out how to do it, it was costly, and it was timely. So what we did was we launched an in-game marketplace and an economy to make it easier for them to make creations and exchange them with other players, also empowering these expert players to sell their creations and actually make a living. We had a handful of these expert players that became our partners that actually quit their full-time jobs and made their whole living off of creating Minecraft. Cool stuff. We launched the product marketplace initially with 7 of these expert creators and 14 pieces of content at launch. So each partner had about 2 pieces of content, and that's how we started our store. As you can see from the picture, we created mine coins, Minecraft coins in the game that players could purchase, and then they can decide how to spend them within the game on these creations that players made. In addition to that, we thought about this partnerships aspect. Now that we had this marketplace, what could we, as Minecraft, as a first party, also add to the marketplace? And we ended up branching out into building partnerships with a lot of high-fidelity brands like Star Wars with Disney. We even did something with Final Fantasy, Stranger Things, actually, for Netflix. That was on one of the slides from the last presenter. And what this did for us, other than bring first-party revenue to the creations that we put into the store, is it also allowed us to engage our players in a new way and win new fans, acquire new users. Because Minecraft was at its peak, any player out there that would have played Minecraft already had. So how can we win the next audience? We started thinking about using Star Wars, for example, because Star Wars has a huge fan base. And some of those fans may have never thought about playing Minecraft before. But because we created a Star Wars experience in Minecraft, this was a second moment for that second audience that isn't a natural doesn't have a natural interest in Minecraft to reconsider playing the game and exploring. So the marketplace had great results. One of the most successful things that I'm proud of is actually just being able to diversify the revenue and the opportunities that this opened up. It created a second life for the game. There were now games within the game, within the marketplace that our own players were making and making a living off of. They were now building their own Minecraft companies based on the marketplace that we built. We were actually able to shift over a quarter of our total revenue for the game, for the whole franchise, to post-sale monetization. Because before this marketplace, we were simply relying on base game sales. As a game at the top of its peak, right? We sold so many copies. How many more can you expect to sell if you're just paying for the base game? You have acquired these hundreds, thousands of users, millions of users, but their one purchase with you is gone, and you didn't have any opportunity to continue reinventing the game and reinvesting. The marketplace gave us this opportunity. So we also had some lessons between all of these different pivots with the Minecraft franchise. Investing in tech debt can open up your options. For me, especially as a non-technical product manager, I pivoted into technology. I don't have a computer science background. It was really interesting to have these debates with our developers about which code base we choose. We were fighting about C++ versus Java. And really seeing that I can clearly, for the first time in my career, pinpoint the ROI and the revenue opportunities it opened up to clear some of these tech debt problems. That was a rare occurrence for me to be able to draw that line between revenue and tech debt investment. We also had some interesting examples while we were deploying the United Code Base in terms of leading with the carrot and not the stick. I don't know if you're familiar with this analogy. I believe it may be American, but it's essentially putting the value for your users up front versus just hard code requiring them to do something. As a part of the new code base, players could play together, and we were at Microsoft, so we wanted to utilize the technology that was within the company. Xbox had a service called Xbox Live that you may be familiar with that allowed people to play online together and save their progress. We wanted to utilize it, so we needed all of our players, most that weren't familiar with Xbox Live, to sign up and create a profile. So what we originally wanted to do was put in a hard stop, require everyone to create an Xbox Live account the next time they open the game before they could play, because we wanted to have everyone to have access to the marketplace as well. But instead, we did a test. We compared if we required them to do it to just simple copy changes. We explained the benefit, the value of doing it. We told them that they get to save their world and they get to play with their friends if they create this account. And we left it as an option. And we found that far and wide, giving the value first and the option was much more successful and created many more accounts than if we required it up front. Finally, I want to talk about not stifling your ecosystem and empowering your users and partners. Because the Minecraft community was so strong, our brand team, our marketing team, was very protective about the Minecraft brand. They constantly wanted to make sure it was portrayed in a positive light. They were very careful about what we added to the game, what kind of new features or products we wanted to try out, because they didn't want to risk that brand recognition. So they were fearful of us launching the marketplace. They were afraid that players would react negatively because we would be asking them for more money, to spend money in the store. So it took us a long time to get to a place that we could have gotten to earlier if they were a bit open to listening to the community, because the marketplace idea didn't only come from myself and my team members, it also came from the players themselves. They wanted easier access to those creations. So don't stifle your ecosystem. Don't stifle the ideas that exist out there. As a mature brand, be vigilant of the opportunities you're expanding on, but know that you can test them out in smaller markets and smaller A/B tests if you're afraid of a wider repercussion. The same for empowering users and partners. The really interesting story with this one is once we launched the marketplace, we had first-party content and third-party content. We had those brand deals like the Star Wars skin pack that we made ourselves, and we also had the creations that our third-party expert players were making. And we found ourselves dancing a fine line between who do we promote, who's on the front page of the marketplace, who do we push to players the most? And we chose to err on the side of empowering our players and our users. I think this created a lot more authenticity and trust between our community through the transition of asking them to spend more money, of changing the game in such a big way. I also really think it's important to stop and talk about failure for a moment. I wouldn't be me if I didn't have this pause in my talk. I think failure is so important, it cannot be understated. To me, pivoting, branching out, exploring, finding product market fit, all of that involves failure. If you're not willing to fail, I would go as far as to say if you're not failing, you're not learning enough. You're not pushing the boundary enough. You have to know where the ceiling and where the floor is to know where the middle that you want to find and be comfortable is. So with that said, I just talked about a lot of awesome pivots we did at Minecraft, but there were plenty of failures as well, so I want to acknowledge those and what we learned from them. My favorite example is the Minecraft sticker pack for iOS. There were huge expectations. It was around the time of the Kim Kardashian, the Kimoji stickers, if anyone is familiar with those. And there were rave articles everywhere in the press about how many millions of dollars she was making from them, and sticker packs were just taking off. So we had a failure with the sticker packs in the sense of it did not meet our expectations. Players had fun. They were great sticker packs, high quality, but it didn't meet our revenue expectations. And similarly, for some other partnerships we tried to pursue a lot of pre-install deals with different carriers and device manufacturers to pre-install the game on devices. A lot of those fell through, and we didn't meet our budget guidelines. So in that sense, there's some practical lessons from failure, and there's a meta lesson. The practical ones are popular trends aren't always the thing to do. Be careful of the timing and if it's a good fit for your product and for your brand. Just because it works for someone else doesn't mean it'll work for you. And large projects with large partners, like the pre-install deals I just mentioned, those take a ginormous amount of time. So especially when you have a mature product on your hands and the pressure of finding a new pivot and a new product opportunity, there are lots of timelines, likely budgets involved. And when your pivot and your initiative, your idea involves working with a large partner, you're likely going to miss those timelines and goals because it always takes forever. The meta point is going rogue is fun. Failure should be, I believe, encouraged as a culture. It will be that much harder to find these different explorations and these pivots and opportunities if your team doesn't feel safe to fail, if they don't feel encouraged to explore and to try without all the pressure of being fired if they're failed, etc. The real important thing to do is not necessarily that everyone must go out there and fail. What they must go out there to do is learn. So as long as you're learning some lessons from your failures, in my book, you're doing the right thing. So failure to rate over. Back to our pivot map. We spoke about user retention and expanding the product suite and partnerships. So my last story will focus on adjacent products. And I think this is a big one. Adjacent products is a really good avenue to look into when you're thinking about expanding and pivoting for mature products. So this story will be at Spotify. And before we jump in, to go back to my BFAB mantra, I want to talk about why I had fun and my team had fun at Spotify. The Spotify that you probably know and love, hopefully, is the consumer version where you listen to music from the cloud. The Spotify that I worked on is Spotify for Artists. So it was the creator side of Spotify, and we got to work with really cool, talented, up-and-coming artists. The artist pictured here, her name is No Name. She's a conscious female rapper from Chicago. So we got to know them personally. We spoke a lot to these users and their teams. So I also assume all of you probably know a lot about Spotify, but just in case, it's also Swedish. I went from Swedish to Swedish. It's a music streaming service. It's over 10 years old. Its core business is this listener experience. So it's a freemium model. You can either listen for free and have ads, or you can pay the premium subscription fee and have features like ad-free offline listening, etc. Spotify is in the mature stage. This product is definitely reaching its peak. It has over 200 million monthly active users. Most of those are paying subscribers. It's available in over 100 countries. So Spotify has, in lots of ways, for the most part, expanded to a lot of the obvious places. We're still working on country expansion, of course, but we've reached a lot of those obvious nooks and crannies. So when I came to Spotify, the challenge was joining this new team, this creator team that was challenged with improving the sentiment that Spotify had with the music industry, and more so, improving Spotify's margins and revenue base. The challenge with Spotify in terms of its business model and revenue is Spotify has to pay royalties for all the music that people listen to. For every song you listen to, we have to pay money to that rights holder. It's all of these mostly record labels all over the world that own all of this content, and every time someone listens, we have to pay them. So what this means is that about 70% of all the revenue that Spotify takes in on a monthly basis is paid right back out. It leaves Spotify to all of these rights holders. So it's a real challenge if Spotify wants to be a sustainable company and around in the future to think of pivots, think about different areas to expand to. So we landed on expanding to a creator product that was a reinvented, better user experience for artists to send content to us. Before we built this product, surprisingly perhaps to you, there was no way for an artist to send music to Spotify directly. They had to go through a middleman, they had to pay those middleman companies, and it was a very painful experience. So we tested this product, which I would consider an adjacent product to Spotify's core product, the business of a submission and editing tool, so an artist can take their album that they've created, put it into our product. This is a GIF of all the features that we had, and edit their content anytime, even after it was live. We also included a promotion mechanism, which was the most innovative thing that we did, I would say, in the sense that these small artists now had a way to find their fan base, where previously it was really difficult for them to get started and find their fans if they were just starting out. And last but not least, we also built a payment system. This was the first time that Spotify was able to pay artists directly. So we had a pilot, we launched a beta, we got a lot of feedback from artists. We began paying artists directly. We created a lot of waves in the music industry, which also caused some agitation with our key partners, the major labels, the 70% of our revenue that we were paying out to them. At the same time, we also had smaller competitors that were able to innovate faster. What happened was some of these big record labels felt a little threatened. They got scared because artists didn't necessarily need them anymore. It really depended on the artist's goals. We gave users a choice, artist users a choice. And because of that agitation, we kept going back and forth with our partners, the labels, to see how we can adjust our product so that it can satisfy individual artist needs as well as have our partners still be comfortable. Where we settled is we had to remove the promotion feature out of our product. So independent artists no longer had access to promote the content that they were distributing through our product. This was the Achilles heel for us. Promotion was our core differentiator. That's what we learned from our users, the artists, that they valued the most. And while we were going back and forth, all of these smaller companies that were just focusing on music distribution were able to move fast and innovate far beyond what we were able to do because we were focused on these political business development relationships. So with that said, we had to, oh, sorry, I am going back instead of forward. With that said, we had to pivot. The core product wasn't working that we had built because the Achilles heel, the promotion feature, was gone. So we ended up moving to focus on B2B products for the major labels, these key partners that we had. We realized the momentum wasn't right for the disruption we were trying to make in the industry, and we would be much better off if we brought our key partners along. So that was a lesson for us. There's a lesson slide next as well. We focused on promotion of the music as the product suite for the major labels, as our B2B product. We knew because of the pilot that we did, because of the product that we built, that promotion was the key. So we doubled down on the thing that worked the most, the one that was the most in demand. And we were able to pivot this way because of ruthless prioritization. It's never easy to kill your product, to kill your baby. So we had to sunset the beta that we created for the distribution product in order to be able to pivot and reinvest and focus on the B2B promotional product. So with that said, one of the biggest lessons for me with this experience was that business dynamics can overpower user demand. Our users, which were the individual artists, loved our product. There was high demand for it. But as a mature product where you have key stakeholders and partners that are vital to your core business, there are certain things you can't always risk. And you can't over-prioritize with new users and new business you're trying to spin up on the side. So in this case, business dynamics won. It's also really key, again, whether it's a failure or a success, to find the strengths and weaknesses during the exploration phase. So I consider the pilot of the distribution product and the beta our exploration phase, and we found our strengths and weaknesses. We knew that promotion was the strength, and we were able to double down on it because we were looking for those lessons in the meantime. And finally, bulletproofing potential complexities cannot be understated. This one may be a bit obvious, but everything from dealing with the stakeholder and partner relationships to the legal expectations to any financial expectations, it's important to plan for those ahead of time so that you are not blowing up your timeline of these pivots. And we'll talk about timelines a little bit to bring it all together. So these are the 4 examples that we walked through. Again, not an exhaustive list, but different strategies you can think about when extending the product lifecycle. What they amount to for me is this lovely chart that I had made. So essentially what you want to do is you want to maximize the things you're already good at. You have a mature product, so you were doing a lot of things right. You were at a peak for that core product. So you want to make sure you're using that relevance. You want to keep the current user base that you have and give them something new, or you want to take the core competencies, the advantages that you've created, and bring them to a new space, the adjacent space. You want to do that while minimizing the effort involved and the time to learn. You want to make it as least expensive as possible to do these explorations and to find this new product market fit in an adjacent category. So with that said, there's no one formula, of course. This is just an example of some frameworks or some methods that you can try out and worked for the 2 examples that I walked you through in terms of avoiding this decline after the mature phase and kicking off on this virtuous loop that you will hopefully find. Really, the challenge of pivoting in a successful way is more about strategy. It's about product discovery. It's going back to the starting board in a way, but in a much more beneficial position because you were already successful and you have so much you can leverage now from your first success, your core product. With each exploration in this new phase, you learn something, and each time, whether you fail or you succeed with each exploration, it'll increase your odds of a successful pivot in the next attempt. So what you want to do is you want to know your strengths and your weaknesses, and you want to use them as an advantage in the pivot. You want to listen to your users, you want to be aware of the ecosystem and the competition, and you want to minimize the cost of the exploration. So you want to learn as quickly as you can, and you want to try things quickly as well. You want to rinse and repeat, and eventually you'll hit those new pivots. So with that said, I'd love to take some questions if there's still time.
Anya, thank you so much for such an amazing talk. Guys, if Anya pivoted so many times, why can't you if you want to? So moving to Q&A session, we have volunteers, and I see the question, I see the hand.
Hello.
Hi.
I consider myself as an avid Spotify user. So my question is not about your product, but overall the client-facing side. So the Spotify experience.
Sure.
Not so long ago, Spotify announced that it's going to email users who has the family plan and check their GPS location. And if you are not among the other people and the same location, so obviously you'll lose the access to the family plan, and you won't be able to use Spotify anymore. So my question is, what's your personal opinion about that, and how the Spotify team would measure the success of this change? Thank you.
It's a very difficult question. We had a lot of the same challenges with Minecraft as well. Essentially, you're trying to give users value, for in this example with a family plan, but you're trying to prevent your users from taking advantage of the value that you're offering. With Minecraft, the example was all of the illegal versions that were made available in all of the Android stores where you can download the game for free. In this case, it's users that aren't really in a family that are benefiting from a discounted price. It's a tough call to make, and I think it's, especially again for a mature product that still has the pressure of continuing to grow revenue and continuing to grow profit, you need to find ways where you can optimize and squeeze. And this may be one area. I'm not particularly on that team, so of course I can't speak for them. Spotify also does a lot of tests, so it may be a test to compare to see how much impact it would make on Spotify if they were to try to crack down in that direction. happy to talk about it after as well. But it's a strategy. One interesting thing that I saw Spotify do a lot, and I didn't do as much of until I came there as a product manager, was what we call fake door tests. So oftentimes, I'm not saying that this is true for this case, but we would send an email and we would say we're doing something just to see the reaction, to see if people would have interest and they would click. Without actually having the feature available. Another example that Spotify did was for high-def listening. So it emailed a bunch of listeners to see if they were interested, but we don't actually have that feature. It's a good tactic.
Thank you. Any other questions, guys? I see a hand over there.
Hi, my name is Stan, product manager at reinvent. Thank you for your insightful speech. Speaking of growth and expansion, why Spotify is still not in Ukraine?
We expected this question, right?
You know, thank you for just putting it out there. It was my one fear that I would have to have a political answer for you. I don't know. We're working on expansion. I realized during the speech that I said we've expanded to a lot of the logical places. We're absolutely still working. There are some countries that are more difficult than others because we have to deal with content licensing and royalties. The music industry is a very convoluted world. I would love to have this conversation after if you're interested in all the facets of it. But there are a lot of ducks that have to be lined up for us to launch in a country according to the copyright regulations, the music industry in the local place. It's just a lot of different things that have to come together. So it's actually a very difficult task.
Thank you very much.
I see hands over here.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you for a great talk. So I have a question. So sometimes when we need to pivot, not all our stakeholders support us because some stakeholders like too cautious, and it can seem like to be too risky. So how do you persuade your stakeholders that it's time to pivot?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've certainly had those challenges with each pivot along the way. Especially for a mature product, you tend to get risk averse. You want to protect what you've built up, and you don't want to risk building that down. So there's a lot of different approaches. My most successful one, frankly, is just establishing a personal relationship. Because essentially, it's the trust in you. Similar to like a startup, you invest in the person, sometimes even more so than the idea. So if they have confidence in you and your team, oftentimes that makes the difference. Another approach that really worked well with more analytical stakeholders is showing them data, but in that sense, convince them to do a really small pilot. Like I had this problem a lot with Minecraft. They were scared of the marketplace. They were scared of reactions. So we picked a small country or a small few countries that we all agreed was representative of a wider sample. And we showed and tested our ideas there. And that gave them more confidence to continue forward. So a lot of times for someone that's risk averse, maybe it's not taking them from A to Z, but creating a lot of small checkpoints along the way. And you can meet together as a group along each stake point and decide, do we all still feel comfortable to continue? Because this is the data, this is the feedback that we've had so far.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I see the hand over there. Guys, it's really so dark. And here you cannot see anything. Thank you so much for showing up.
Hi, Anya. Thank
Hi.
you for a great speech. When you mentioned pivot, you said that you moved recommendation engine from the end users to the labels, right? Did you change that feature for B2B model, or it stayed just as it worked? Or you adjusted it for a new model, and how it actually works, how you use those recommendations, how they work? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought about that after I made these slides because it said we pivoted, but really we are still pivoting. So we're figuring that out as we go right now. Our goal, again, going back to launching something quickly, learning quickly, making sure you take those lessons and doing it in the least costly way. So right now, our goal when we pivot initially is to have some pilots, some alpha customers where we we don't change, or we don't change as much as we can convince them to not change. In B2B, especially when you're first starting out, it's very much building up that relationship. So you have to make sure what you have is of value when you're only talking about 5 big customers to start out with. So we're trying to minimize how much we change just so we can test the concept, validate it, and then go from there. But generally speaking, we reused a lot of the back end, right? A lot of the recommendation, a lot of the logic that we have built in to power which users will get the notification that an album is available for an artist they might like. But the front end will have to change. We developed the front end for an individual artist, so we were really focused on more consumer style things like ease of use, giving them an easy way to access it. And with large customers, there'll be relationship managers, there'll be some custom campaigns they'll want to do. So those things will eventually, my guess is, change down the line. But the key is to find the right moment to invest in that.
We have one more question in the audience in the middle row.
Thank you very much. My question is about the customer feedback, because you mentioned that you do a lot of experiments to figure out whether the pivot or the new features they actually work, whether your users like it. And Spotify is a huge company with a huge customer database. How do you do those research? Do you have like automized software that checks the feedback, or do you do it manually, or maybe how do you perceive with user interviews? Because as I imagine, it's hard to do on that scale of data.
Yeah, that's a great question also. At this point, Spotify is so big that we do it all. We have an automated A/B testing platform, so especially when you talk about optimizing the core product or doing some small tweaks, we use that for the most part. When it came to the creator side, it was totally new. It was a totally new cohort of users. Those artists may also be consumer users, but they had very different needs and very different expectations for the music industry side, for the tools that they wanted from us. So we started with user research, one-on-one, in groups, an artist and their manager, us just sitting down with them and asking them open-ended questions and see where they navigate to. So we really used it all in the end. Did it answer your question? Anyone else?
Any hands? Oh, I see a hand in the audience. By the way, amazing questions.
Yeah, thank you for all the questions. I hope the warm-up with the participation helped. Yeah, now we know Tetris is number 2.
Hi, I had a question also about sort of the concept of pivoting. In particular, how do you know when you should pivot the product versus just scratch it and build something new? So like instead of pivoting Minecraft to Minecraft 2.
That's a great question. I'm not sure I even have the right answer to that. I would want to take some more time to think about it. But it is a tough challenge. And in certain cases, we definitely explored both. While we pivoted on building the marketplace and uniting the code bases, we had kind of like a stealth team off to the side thinking about totally new games. But especially for a mature product, and if you have high revenue expectations, if you have a lot of investment on the line, pivoting means you're reusing a lot of the advantages and the learnings that you had from your core product. So it means, in my mind, the likelihood for success is higher than if you were to start totally from scratch. With Minecraft, it was kind of like, can a team go off in the corner and recreate the magic that happened? Because Minecraft was a lot of magic for how it became viral, for how popular it got. It's not a formula that can necessarily just be recreated. So in my mind, pivoting, if there was the right opportunities and we found the product market fit for those pivots, was a safer bet.
Anya, thank you so much. Guys, huge round of applause to Anya.